I don't know if anyone will believe this. I wouldn't if I hadn't lived through it myself. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what happened after my wife and I moved into that house, the one sitting at the edge of the forest, where the trees never seem to move. People always talk about the peace of the countryside, how quiet and beautiful it is. But no one ever tells you what silence can really do to you, how it can press down on you until you start hearing things that aren't there, or worse, noticing the things that are. We left the city to start over to find calm. Instead, we found something that shouldn't exist. If you're listening to this, I need you to understand one thing. When the woods go silent, it's not because they're empty. Sometimes silence means something else is listening. Emily and I had talked about leaving the city for years. At first, it was just talk, late-night fantasies, whispered between exhaustion and routine. The kind of dream you keep alive so life doesn't swallow you whole. But then, her job went fully remote, and mine, well, mine vanished in a round of corporate restructuring. They handed me a severance check and a box full of useless desk trinkets. And for the first time in years, silence followed me home. That silence grew. The city's hum, once comforting, started to feel like static in my skull. The neighbors I never knew suddenly felt too close, the streets too narrow, the air too heavy. Emily said we needed space room, to breathe room, to remember who we were before the noise. I agreed, because saying no would have meant admitting I was scared to change. She found the listing one night. An old two-story house tucked against the edge of a sprawling forest. The pictures looked like something from an old postcard. Faded green shutters, a wraparound porch ivy curling up the stone. "It's perfect," she said, eyes wide in the glow of her laptop. I laughed. "Looks like the start of a horror movie." She smiled back. "Or the start of something good." We bought it within a week. It felt impulsive, reckless, but freeing. We sold the last pieces of our city life, packed what mattered, and drove until the streetlights disappeared behind us. The air grew colder, cleaner. The GPS signal died somewhere along a dirt road, and for a while, the only sound was gravel crunching beneath the tires and Murphy's tail thumping in the back seat. When we first saw the house, it didn't feel haunted. It felt waiting. The wood creaked under our feet. The porch sagged in places, but everything about it breathed a quiet kind of dignity. Emily loved it instantly. She spent that first evening on the porch, wrapped in an old sweater, watching the sun slip behind the tree line. I remember thinking she looked younger then, like the weight she carried had finally eased. But for me, something felt wrong. Not loudly wrong, not the kind of wrong you can point at and say there. It was in the stillness. The air didn't move. The trees stood like they were holding their breath. I realized only when it was gone how much I depended on background noise, sirens, traffic, even the buzz of streetlights. Out here, there was nothing. Not wind, not birds, not the faint chirp of insects. Just nothing. Murphy noticed it first. He trotted across the yard, tail high, sniffing everything. But when he neared the tree line, he stopped. His ears flattened. The happy wag of his tail slowed, then died entirely. I called his name, expecting him to bolt after some squirrel, but instead, he backed away, step by step. Emily laughed, tried to coax him forward. "What's wrong, buddy?" He whined a low, mournful sound and turned back toward the porch. That was the first time I felt it. That thin thread of unease coiling somewhere deep in my chest. The sense that the forest wasn't just there, it was watching. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was the quiet, the adjustment, maybe even the smell of damp wood. But that night, as the sun bled out behind the trees and the shadows pooled at the edge of the yard, I caught Emily staring into the forest. She looked peaceful. I couldn't tell if it was admiration or recognition. The next few days were a blur of unpacking, cleaning, and pretending everything felt normal. Emily hummed while she worked barefoot on the old wooden floors, sunlight catching in her hair like gold dust. I wanted to match her energy, but the longer I spent there, the heavier the quiet became. There were no cars, no distant engines, no wind sighing through the trees. The air hung thick, not peaceful, but muted, like the world was holding something back. Even our voices felt wrong when we spoke too loud against the stillness. One afternoon, I stepped outside with my coffee, hoping the crisp air would clear my head. The yard stretched wide-ending abruptly at the dark wall of trees. The forest didn't look wild. It looked asleep. The branches stood unnaturally still, every leaf fixed in place, like a painting, waiting for someone to move the brush again. I told myself I was being dramatic, that silence could be beautiful. But as I watched, I noticed something strange. Not a single leaf fell. Not one. The ground was bare, even though the trees were full and green. I frowned, staring at the soil beneath the trunks, and realized it looked untouched, as if nothing had ever decayed there. Emily joined me on the porch, holding a mug between her hands. "It's perfect, isn't it?" she said softly. Her voice carried across the yard, then vanished. No echo, no return. It was like the forest swallowed the sound. Murphy padded out behind her, sniffing the air. He'd been uneasy since the move, never venturing far from the porch. But now he stood at the top step, ears tilted forward, staring at the tree line. His hackles rose. A low growl rippled through his chest. "Murph," I crouched, patting my knee. "Hey, it's okay." He didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on the same spot, a patch of shadow where the trees grew thickest. My stomach tightened. There was nothing there, just darkness between trunks. Still, I felt something looking back. Emily clicked her tongue. "He's just nervous. New smells." But I wasn't convinced. Murphy backed away slowly, tail tucked, never breaking eye contact with the woods. Then he turned and slunk back inside, disappearing beneath the table. When I looked at Emily again, she was still watching the forest. Her expression had softened into something almost reverent. "You can feel it, can't you?" she said, not looking at me. "Feel what?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "It's alive." Her words lingered long after she'd gone inside. Alive. The forest. That night, the silence felt thicker. I lay awake, listening for the faintest hint of sound. A breeze, a bird, anything, but there was only the hum of my own pulse in my ears. Somewhere in the dark, Murphy shifted restlessly. Then, just as my eyelids began to drift, I heard it. A single creak. Not from the house, deeper, older. It came from the forest. I held my breath. The sound didn't come again. Only silence stretching so long, it began to ache. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't before. Silence isn't empty. It's full of everything that isn't speaking, everything waiting to be heard. And out there in the dark, something was listening. By the end of our first week, Emily was restless. She said the stillness calmed her, that she finally felt herself again. I couldn't tell if that was true, or if she was just convincing herself it was. The forest fascinated her. She'd spend hours on the porch eyes, fixed on the tree line, like she was waiting for something to move. One morning, she decided to explore. I saw a trail, she said, lacing up her boots. Just a few minutes into the woods. Are you sure you want to go alone? I asked. She smiled, tightening her backpack strap. It's fine. I used to hike all the time as a kid. I just want to see where it goes. I didn't like it, but arguing felt pointless. So I kissed her cheek, told her not to go too far, and watched her walk toward the trees. Murphy barked once, sharp, uncertain, and she turned waving before disappearing into the shade. Hours passed. By late afternoon, I started pacing the porch, checking my phone, even though I knew there was no signal.